this is a big topic. Fasting seems to create a lot of questions for a lot of people. So if this is something where I see lots and lots of deeper questions, repeated questions, we can maybe do a part 2, because today is kind of a basics. It's just a very big topic. There's a lot to talk about. So with that, let's get started. What is fasting? So first of all, the definition of fasting is not eating. That's it. That is the end of story. But what it is, just to give some background, it is actually an evolutionary process. Fasting has been around forever. It isn't a new thing. I think people tend to think of fasting as this new hot trend that people are doing. People have been fasting forever, since the dawn of time. And essentially, if you think about it, those who were better at fasting were more likely to survive, if we think of it from an evolutionary perspective, because there were times of feast and there were times of famine. We didn't have a Trader Joe's down the street. We didn't have microwaves, like way back. And so those who were able to survive in times of scarcity were more likely to pass on their genetics. So it actually is an evolutionary tool to be able to fast. It's instilled in many types of religious practices as a way to get back to your center and to remember what the purpose of that religious practice is. So it's used a lot in methods for kind of coming inward, listening to yourself, listening to your body, listening to your spirit. It was also part of our daily life for eons. It was like a normal piece of daily life, but it has been replaced by uninterrupted eating patterns. So there is no fasting period that's just instilled into our day anymore. You will see people eating at all hours of the day. Drive-throughs are open at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's no fasting that's kind of instilled into our cultural eating pattern. But we actually are supposed to be able to do that. So fasting means the absence of food or drink, AKA the absence of a physiological response. So a lot of people ask about water. You're not getting a physiological response from water when it comes to metabolism. You're not having a metabolic response. So no, you won't be kicked out of a fasting state if you drink water. So it really should be the absence of caloric food or drink is fasting. So the physiological response is that you switch from glucose or sugar molecules as your fuel to fatty acids or ketones as your fuel. So that is what happens when we actually get into a fasted state, is that our body uses glucose all day long. We have a little snack, we have an apple, we have a stressor, our blood sugar goes up in some way, shape, or form. We use that blood sugar for energy. But if there is no sugar source in the bloodstream, our body has to go somewhere else for fuel. And our bodies are awesome. They're very adaptive. And so they know where else to go. If there's no sugar available, they're going to go tap into our fat stores and use fat as energy as well. And this is actually a more efficient process because we all store fat and we can all turn fat into glucose or a type of sugar molecule or a type of fuel. So we're actually using what we have on board instead of bringing it in from the outside. So if you think of truly like the most efficient way for your metabolism to work, it's to use up everything you got inside before you go outside for fuel. That's what happens in a fasted state. On a molecular level, you also have something called autophagy, which we'll talk about in a second, and cellular cleanup. And so when you're in a fasted state, your body is able to sort of clean up shop, go through and spring clean, if you will, which is why I often talk about fasting during the spring. So we're all kind of in detox spring cleaning mode. So let's talk about those things. This is a lengthy list of the benefits of fasting. One is an enhanced heart rate variability. If you've not heard about heart rate variability, I invite you to go to our website under the video tab and watch my webinar from about 2 months ago all about tracking your health, because I talked a lot about HRV there and I went a little bit deeper. But a real basic level of HRV or heart rate variability is the amount of time in between your heartbeats and the variability of that time, because actually we don't want exact seconds in between each heartbeat. That means we're very static and we're kind of in a stressful response. But if we're easygoing, we're going with the flow, everything's great, I'm not super stressed, we're probably gonna have a second here, 10 seconds there, 15 seconds here. You're gonna have a variable amount of time in between your heartbeats, which is a good thing. So we want a high amount of variability of time in between your heartbeats. The higher that HRV goes, the more calm your body is, the more in that rest and digest state you are. And what we see in research is that fasting is significantly associated and correlated with a better HRV. So the more someone fasts, and we're going to get into how to fast appropriately. Don't worry. I'm not talking about fasting for, days and days at a time. But the more someone fasts, the more consistent someone is at fasting, the better their HRV is. So the better you fast, the more relaxed you are, which is also directly correlated with your heart health, your cardiovascular health. The better your HRV is, the better your cardiovascular health is. Okay, so your heart rate and your blood pressure are improved. Fasting also improves our fat burning, because we talked about that. When we fast and we go a while without having a sugar source for fuel, we're going to end up tapping into our fat cells, which means we're going to get better and better and better each time we do that at burning fat instead of burning sugar. So we get better at burning fat. We also, therefore, have better insulin sensitivity, because when we get rid of the fat that's in the way of our insulin, we allow our insulin to actually get to our cell, open the door, and let the sugar in. Okay, so it's kind of like a two-step process. The better we are at getting rid of the fat and burning it, the more effective and efficient our insulin can be. So we're more insulin sensitive, which is the opposite of insulin resistance, which is usually what we hear. We hear insulin resistance tied to diabetes. We want insulin sensitivity. It also enhances our metabolic flexibility. What does that mean? It means that our body very, very easily can go from burning sugar to burning fat, to burning sugar to burning fat. We want that. We want our body to be metabolically flexible so that no matter what, if we're going all day without eating, if we are going on vacation and they only have certain types of foods, we're eating more carbs than usual, we're eating more proteins than usual, we want our body to be able to flexibly go from one side to another. What happens when we don't have times of fasting, when we're just kind of eating all day long, is that our body gets used to that immediate source of sugar and it forgets how to go use fat. So then even if you do have a day of fasting, let's say, just a random one once a year, you're probably not going to tap into those fat cells very well because your body doesn't know how to do it. You have to train it. It has to practice at being flexible. Okay, so we want that. What else is a cool thing about fasting? This was a newer one for me to learn back when I created these slides about a year ago. I had never heard of MMC, but it is the migrating motor complex. And what that is it's the whole spider web of muscles that are needed to stimulate your peristalsis. Peristalsis is the contraction and release of your stomach to push everything through. So think of this. If you ate a meal, we've all felt this way, and like 20 minutes later, I'm like bloated, right? I feel like nothing has actually gone through my system. Everything's just sitting there gross in my stomach and I'm feeling bloated and I don't feel good. That's probably because your peristalsis wasn't working very well. For whatever reason, your muscles weren't contracting to push those food molecules through. Excuse me, I need to make sure my phone is on silent. I just heard it ding. I didn't want to interrupt us. So the migrating motor complex is all the muscles that make that peristalsis happen. Now, what's kind of interesting is that migrating motor complex only activates about every 2 hours, and it will only activate in the fasted state. So if we are eating, we're only going to do enough pushing through that, like that's normal for our body's response. That whole complex of muscles that pushes and creates peristalsis won't occur. So what we see is that a lot of people who eat all day long, every couple of hours, they just never quite get into a fasted state, is their MMC, that complex of muscles, gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And you have less and less strong peristalsis, and you have all that gunk hanging out in your gastrointestinal tract. So you feel bloated all the time, and you end up having an overabundance of bacteria, which can lead to things like SIBO and dysbiosis and gut stuff. Okay, so fasting is good for our gut is the point there. You also end up having reduced stress on all of your organs. All of your organs need rest. And when you are in eating mode, when you are in digestive mode, everything's working. Your heart is working to pump your blood around so that the blood can take all those molecules of food you just ate and absorb and put them where they need to go. And your muscles are working for that gut response. And your brain is working because all the neurons are going around saying, am I hungry? Am I full? Did that taste good? Where do I put that? Everything is working. And so if you don't give your system a break, nothing can rest. So you end up having these overly stressed organ systems when we are not getting into a fasted state. And what happens too is how many of us are eating a nighttime snack right before we go to bed? And maybe it's something like a fruit. We think, oh, okay, great. Fruit is healthy for me. I'm going to have a piece of fruit. I'm stimulating my blood sugar response. I'm going to bed, but my body now has to figure out what to do with that blood sugar I just ate. So even though I'm sleeping, my organ and my digestive system is still working and functioning and not being able to rest. So I can't get into a deep sleep. My melatonin can't be produced because my digestive system is working over here. So even though we're sleeping, we're not resting as well because we ate. Okay, so we have to get into that fasted state. Enhanced neuroplasticity. What this means is all the neurons are able to do what they're supposed to do. The same idea as metabolic flexibility, where we can use sugar or fat. We want our neurons to be flexible as well and be able to learn new things and not get stuck. And that can only happen in a fasted state. And then we also have the immune response of autophagy. I mentioned this in the very first slide of a very big, awesome benefit of fasting. Autophagy is, think of it as your body's spring cleaning system, okay? Over time, we start accumulating things on that counter. That's that picture in the top right. We all have that junk drawer or that counter where things get kind of tossed and thrown. And okay, over time, all of a sudden it's like, I can't find anything here. That thing over there doesn't even work anymore. I don't know why it's not being thrown away. And we have to spring clean and we get rid of it. And, now we feel better. This countertop works. All the stuff on top of it works. Our body goes through a very similar system with our cells. And each area of our body has its own what we call turnover rate. So your skin cells turn over about every 14 days. Your gut cells turn over every certain amount of days. Usually it's like 2 months on those ones. Every system has different types of cells that turn over or slough themselves off, and that's called autophagy, where your body goes through, finds kind of the old, not working, cluttered up cells and gets rid of them and generates new ones. And if this isn't happening, we end up having some of these old, not working, kind of crusty old cells that can start to get genetically mutated. And that's where we get risk of things like cancer. That's where we get risk of simply not being able to recover from immune issues going on from COVID or the flu. We don't recover as well because our body hasn't gone through autophagy. So I have to explain that to you so you understand how important autophagy is. You see down there in that graph that it's significantly correlated with longevity, with your metabolism, with brain protection. Think how important that turnover of brand new cells is in the brain. Cancer suppression, cardiovascular health, and DNA repair. When can autophagy happen? 2 times. When you're in intense exercise, so high intensity, like HIIT training, where I am completely out of breath. I'm at 80 to 100% max of my heart rate capacity, high intensity exercise, which we recommend once or twice a week, and during times of fasting. That's it. Those are the only 2 times where you can turn on autophagy. So again, you think through that nighttime concept of I had some fruit, I had a granola bar, a bowl of cereal, a little piece of toast before I go to bed. I go to bed and I'm not actually fasting while I'm sleeping because I'm having to metabolize and digest all of those glucose cells that I just ate. So I don't really even get to that true fasted state until 3, 4, 5 hours later. And now my body is starting to get ready to wake up again. So I haven't been able to get into autophagy for maybe at all, maybe for an hour or 2, when really we want to be on autophagy for 4 to 6 hours every day, ideally. So this is the only time we can get there, which is why, again, fasting is so important. So there's 2 different methods of fasting. So I've got your buy-in, right? We like fasting, but how on earth are we supposed to do it? Because I hear so many things on the internet, on social media. I see things there's all these different recommendations for how to fast, and they're not all safe. I think some people are also scared of fasting because we've seen some of the bad sides of it, but there are really healthy, really easy ways to do fasting. So there's 2 main categories. One is intermittent, and one is prolonged, or what some people call periodic fasting. So you're fasting for a longer period of time. We're going to go over both. I want to really focus on intermittent because that's the most realistic. That's the one with almost no side effects at all. Underneath intermittent is time restricted and alternate day fasting. So let's look at time restricted because this is where I want you to focus. This is my recommendation for you on how to fast appropriately and healthfully. This is where I like everybody to start because this is realistic, normal. It fits into your everyday life, and this is where you're going to get a lot of benefit. So time restricted simply means that you're not eating for a certain amount of time each day. So there's kind of three main methods out there in the research. There's the 12-12, which means you're fasting for 12 hours and you are eating for 12 hours. Now, we're going to talk about what to eat, but it doesn't mean you're eating nonstop for 12 hours. It just means you have a 12-hour window where you can eat and a 12-hour window where you don't eat at all. There's the 14-10. That's where you fast for a 14-hour window and you eat during a 10-hour window. And there's the 16-8, and that's where you fast for a 16-hour window and you eat for an 8-hour window. So the 12-12 would simply mean the very last bite of anything caloric that I have for the day is at 7 p.m. and I don't have anything again except for water until 7 a.m. the next day. Pretty normal, right? It's not that scary. It's not that scary to stop eating by 7 and start again at 7. The 14-10 would be to stop eating at 7 and to not eat again until 9 o'clock the next morning. And then again, the 16 would be to not eat again until 11 o'clock the next morning. And you can flip-flop that. So here are the reasons why I like it. One is it's super normal. It's not scary. It just means don't eat overnight. Don't eat something caloric, super sugary right before you go to bed. Give yourself a long window of time overnight while you sleep. You're not going to feel hungry to not eat. Okay. It's also very flexible. Nothing says you have to pick the 12-12 and stick to it forever. You can have a 12-12 tonight and do a 14-10 the next day. And then the next day you're going to a party and maybe you only really make it actually an 11-hour fast, but we get back into the 12-12 and the 14-10 after that. Very flexible, very fluid. It can move and shift by an hour or two each night or each morning as long as you're just kind of paying attention to that fasting window. So with that, how to eat in that fasting window. So that matters. So step one is just get yourself onto that clock routine. That is step one. If you've never dabbled with fasting before, don't worry about anything else but getting yourself to a 12-12. Just start there and see if you can dabble into 14-10 and 16-8. I should have said here too, before we moved on to the next slide, is that everyone is going to be really different in what feels best to them and what benefits them the most. What the research shows is that men can go into that 16-8 a lot easier and usually get more benefit from it. Women, premenopausal and perimenopausal, we tend to do much better in the 12-12, 14-10 range, with the exception of that 1 week before your period. And then you can do a 16-8 because you tend to have a whole lot of energy right then. So there's actually cyclical recommendations for women versus men and postmenopausal women. Kind of, it's just like find your rhythm, find what feels best. So how to eat in that window. Once we've gotten that timing down, now we need to figure out how to eat within the window because that is important. And it isn't just, well, you fasted for 14 or 16 hours and now you get to go crazy and have chocolate cake and like ice cream all day long. You can sometimes. We're all about moderate eating. But it is important to look at how we're eating in the eating window to benefit from all those cool things that just happened during the fasting, right? Because our cells are working well, our metabolism is just like on fire, doing super great. I am insulin sensitive, I am ready for food. Let's eat well to take advantage of that. So one is to focus on real foods, minimizing ultra processed foods. Okay, and we've talked about this in a lot of different classes. If you're like, what is she talking about from ultra processed foods? Go back to previous ones, meal planning from last week, we talked about this. Aim for moderate protein and fat with lower amounts of carb. And I'm not saying eliminate carb. Our bodies need carbohydrate. We just often don't need quite as much as most Americans are eating. Usually we're needing 100 to 150 grams per day, depending on the person. You can go as low as 50 if you're in a like significant keto diet, but then you'd really want to know your food. So you want a good amount of protein. This is where most people have the higher amount of carb with the lower amount of protein. You want 40 to 50% of your diet from protein, and then the rest is split between fats and carbs. If you do that, you'll be doing pretty well. So I actually heard a really cool analogy about fats and carbs as far as our fuel, because we talked about how we want our body to be metabolically flexible, right? We want it to go from carbs to fat to carbs to fat. Think of fat as your logs in the fire. That slow burning, they stay there a long time, but they give you these little bits of fuel consistently. Carbs are the kindling that you're throwing on to give yourself a big burst of energy now and again, but you're not doing it all the time. That's how we should be thinking of it, is we should be relying on fat enough to where we don't need to throw kindling on the fire consistently. We don't need to be eating carbs all the time because our body knows how to dip into the fat, okay? Aim for 3 hours in between your eating, because we also want to fast throughout our eating window. If we're eating and then we're eating and then we're eating and then we're eating, it makes it really hard for our body to digest what it just ate because we now have something else coming in. So ideally, there's 3 hours in between bites of food during the eating window. And this is going to depend on how you eat. If you're someone who likes large volume meals, you might really just need 2 large meals in that eating window, especially if it's only an 8-hour eating window. If you like to eat smaller meals, maybe you're someone who gets some IBS sometimes and you tend to do just better with smaller volume, maybe you do eat 3, possibly even 4 times in that eating window, but they're very small amounts. So this is where things get really personalized and you have to figure out what works best for you. But ideally, you are eating at least 2 hours before bed as your last bite. That's when your fasting window starts. So it's not my last bite of food is 10 p.m. and I'm hitting the sack. Because then remember, we're not getting into fasting for a while. We're digesting, metabolizing while we're sleeping. We want to have our last bite of food, give our body some time to digest that. So once we get into a deep sleep, we actually are truly fasted and our body can start tapping into the fat cells and become metabolically flexible. And we want to make sure that we are hydrating appropriately because our cells are like grapes. And if they get dehydrated, they should shrivel up into little raisins and nothing can get inside of a raisin. None of those molecules can get in there. So then what's the point of all this really great eating if none of the nutrients are getting inside your cells? So we want to make sure we're really well hydrated so our cells are nice and plump. They can absorb things, they can get rid of things, they can do their job. The other piece of this puzzle is the stress piece. So I put mindful eating on here because it's a cute graphic, but it's not just about being mindful while you eat. It's about being mindful, period. Is that we want to make sure that we are looking at our stress response because there's been some really cool research that shows if you are in a stressed mode, if you are in fight or flight mode, it doesn't matter that you just had 16 hours of fasting. All of those benefits are eliminated. They're wiped out. It's like it never even happened. All those cool things that just happened to your metabolism and to your immune health and your MMC and your digestive system, it all flip-flops and goes backwards if you immediately are in a stressed out state the second you wake up or the second you ate your meal. So the stress piece is actually the more important piece. If anyone was part of my anti-inflammatory series, we talked about hormesis or hormetic stress, and that's where the body wants a little bit of stress to get benefit. So exercise is a great example of hormetic stress, where we're getting a little bit of stress on our muscle to break it down in order to rebuild our muscle. But if you're exercising every day nonstop, that's no longer hormesis. That's not good stress. That's too much stress. Fasting is hormetic stress. It's a little bit of a stress on the body to not eat, which makes and forces your body to practice using other sources of fuel, which is a good thing. But if we're fasting too long, or if we're excessively stressed while we're fasting, now we're putting stress upon stress upon stress, and it's too much for our body to handle, and we're no longer getting a benefit anymore. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, is that we want a little bit of hormetic stress from fasting, just teasing the body with, I want you to try a little harder. I want you to practice doing all these other things, but not to layer on too much fasting or other sources of intense stress at the same time, which is why cycles are important for women, because when we are in certain weeks of our cycle, our body is stressed. And so if we're stressed and fasting, it's too much, we're not getting a benefit. Okay. It's also a reason why we don't want to do excessive stressing or excessive fasting, like multiple days in a row, because it's too much stress on top of stress. Okay. So how do we break our fast? We just did this awesome, let's say 14-hour overnight fast. I'm feeling good. I'm going to have a huge bacon cheese omelet burrito thing. No, we want to eat really well to kick that body off, because your body is in this prime state to do well. So you want to start your day with something on the lighter side. Your first meal should be smoothies, soups, oatmeal, maybe scrambled eggs, but something that's slightly easier to digest. Anything that will break your fast is anything more than 20 calories. So this is usually the question I get, is like, well, what can I have? Or maybe I woke up and I want to stay in my fast for another hour or two, but I'm a little hungry. Anything more than 20 hours will kick you out of that fasted state, or more than 20 calories will kick you out of that fasted state. Anything at all with sugar in it or artificial sugar. Why would artificial sugar kick you out of a fasted state if it doesn't increase your blood sugar? Because it is telling your body that something tastes sweet, and your brain tells your pancreas, here comes something sweet, put out some insulin, buddy. So you're having an insulin response to artificial sweetener, which means you're no longer fasted, because now you have insulin floating around. So you're not having a blood sugar response, but you are having an insulin response when you have artificial sweetener. So just know that if you have, coffee with some stevia in it, that's not artificial, but like Splenda in it, you will be kicked out of the fasted state. Okay, so just so you know that. Anything that needs to be taken with food, any type of supplement that needs to be taken with food, the reason they need to be taken with food is because they're fat soluble, and because of that process, that will kick you out of the fasted state as well. Okay. All right, so we talked about time restricted. Alternate day is really just where you take some days of fasting and some days off. The most common is called the 5-2, where you fast 2 days of the week and you eat 5 days of the week. I don't love it. There's not as many good rules around it, like guidelines, where it's like, well, how long during those 5 days of eating do I eat? Can I eat 24 hours a day? And some people don't do well with a full 24 hours of fasting, especially if you're on a certain type of medication that needs food. And it's just not quite as consistent. So I don't like things that aren't consistent. I think it's hard to stick with them. So I highly recommend time restricted, but there is some good research around alternate day benefits as well. If that's just something that fits your routine, you're welcome to Google that. Then there we have the prolonged and periodic fast. You have the water fast and the fasting mimicking. Water fasting has excellent research around it. So we're talking anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. Some people will do a 4th day of water fasting, and this is truly nothing but water for that prolonged period of time. There's some awesome research around it, especially for immune health, because you just completely wipe the slate clean. You make your body use all of its reserves. The problem is there can be downsides when it comes to water fasting. First of all, you're going to be hungry. And obviously, the more you do it, the more you get used to that feeling. But it's just, again, it's that lack of consistency. It can be really hard to stick to. Because you're not having any fat intake, you can actually put some risk and some hardship on your gallbladder. And if you're someone who's already at risk of gallstones, that could trigger that. Because you're having no salt intake, anyone who's older or at risk of hypotension will have that. Because you're having no carbohydrate intake, you may have hypoglycemia. So if you're someone with borderline diabetes, that's not a good idea. Because you're not having protein intake, you may see muscle wasting. Now, 3 days isn't going to exactly waste a whole lot of muscle. I'm not too worried about a 72-hour fast for muscle wasting, but still, if you're someone who is already low in muscle, this isn't a great idea. You're not having any fiber, so you're going to be messing with your microbiome, and it could have some potential hormonal reactions for women. So it's not saying these things will definitely happen to you if you do a 24, 48, 72-hour fast. Many people do really well with that. The problem is there's a risk here, and everyone has a really individual risk, and there's no real way of knowing exactly what your risk is going to be with this. So that's why I really lean on intermittent fasting, because you're eliminating risk. There really isn't any when you're intermittent fasting overnight, versus you do run some risks here by doing the longer fasts. So the other fast, just to go backwards, so you have the water fast and you have the fasting mimicking. So I want to talk to you about fasting mimicking. It is like a copyrighted thing. There's a business called Prolon L Nutra that does fasting mimicking. I just happen to really love it. So it's Dr. Walter Longo. He works at USC. He's written many books. You can Google him. He's called the godfather of fasting because he's been doing this research for so long and so long on longevity. He's done research on vegan and longevity, fasting and longevity, carbohydrate restriction and longevity. I mean, he's done amazing stuff. So he came up with this diet plan, and it's a 5-day plan that is plant-based. It technically uses some honey, so it's not technically keto, but it is plant-based. And it's just slightly not ketogenic. It actually has a good amount of carbohydrate, 45%, but it's all from fiber. It's like 100% from fiber. So because of that, you get a keto response in your body while not starving your body of fiber. It's very cool. It's very low calorie. We're talking 800 to 1,000 calories a day. So it's very, very low calorie. It does use inulin, which is a type of fiber, so some people can get cramping with it. And if you've never dabbled with ketosis or fasting before, you could have side effects like headache and fatigue and just feeling overall weak because you've never done that before. But essentially, you get this box with 5 days of food, and this is how it works. So with normal diets, when we're eating normally, we see this on this red and this green chart there, and there's a little line right above the top green box. What that means is this is your pathways of sensing nutrients. So when we go way over the green line, we're nowhere near fasting. When we're way under the green line, when we are truly not eating anything at all, we run the risk of all of those risk factors that I just told you about, even though we are getting the benefit of autophagy. We're not anywhere near autophagy on the first one. We're definitely getting autophagy on the second one, but we're also running risks. But what if his hypothesis was, what if you could eat just enough to stay under that line that keeps you in ketosis and gives you autophagy without actually going over the line? And that's where his diet plan has been created, is that his is like, it's all scientifically made, where you are eating just enough calories, carbs, fats, and protein to essentially trick your cells into thinking you are fasting, but you do get to eat a little bit. So you don't have any like malnourishment side effects. You still do feel a little bit hungry. I mean, it's only 800 calories, but we're not having any physiological risk factors there. So it's mimicking. It's mimicking the effects of fasting while still getting to eat a little bit. So I'm not selling this necessarily, although we do get commission from anyone who buys their product, but I just want you to know what's out there in case you are someone who really significantly needs to lose a lot of weight, has had a significant risk of immune issues in your history. Maybe you have cancer treatment coming up in the future. There's some reasons why you might want to do some more intense fasting protocols, and this is a much safer way of doing it than just doing a water fast for 3 or 5 days. So this is your alternative to water fast. This is not your alternative to intermittent fasting. So here's what I recommend as a healthy protocol throughout the year is you may want to do fasting mimicking. That's what FMD is, fasting mimicking diet. You may want to do that maybe 2 times a year as needed to basically clean up shop, get a really intense benefit from fasting without the risk. And then in between, you're doing intermittent fasting, overnight fasting with a balanced Mediterranean type style diet. And you follow your time restricted eating based on if you're a man or a woman, and just also based on your own personal reactions to fasting. So 16-8, 14-6, or 12-12 would be your different methods of time restricted eating. That's where the normal person, that's where you stay. You don't need to worry about fasting mimicking diets and water fasting. But again, if you've had a major sickness, if you need to lose a lot of weight, if you have had like an immune issue or an upcoming immune issue, you might want to give yourself a deeper dive into the fasting benefits with that fasting mimicking. So these are the main categories of people I find can benefit from fasting mimicking: weight loss, or weight maintenance, healthy aging support, and if you have cardiometabolic or immune issues. And again, you don't need to do it very often, with the exception of weight loss, which we do recommend it actually maybe even monthly. For everyone else, for just general kind of health purposes, once, twice, maybe 3 times a year, you do that 5-day protocol, and then in between it's the overnight fasting. And if you have zero health issues, you're healthy as a horse, you're just like, I just want to be preventive, then forget the fasting mimicking and just do overnight fast consistently. The only precautions to any type of fasting are if you have a thyroid condition where you require thyroid hormone medication, you may want to just talk with your doctor about how that medication will interact with being in autophagy and make sure that you take your medication in your eating window. With blood sugar medications, the only thing is to monitor your blood sugar while you fast. Oftentimes your blood sugar gets a lot better. And so if you're already on medication that keeps your blood sugar low and then your blood sugar goes lower, you risk hypoglycemia. So it might be something where you possibly change your dose while you're fasting. Not appropriate for anyone in growth mode, because when we're in growth mode, we're accumulating cells, we're putting stuff in the junk drawer. It's only later when we're not growing anymore that we want to actually backtrack and start spring cleaning. So if you're under 18, I don't want you fasting. If you're underweight significantly, I don't want you fasting. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, you're in growth mode, I don't want you fasting, and anyone with disordered eating, of course. And then we do actually find that athletes do fine with intermittent fasting as long as you're meeting your calorie needs. And then again, with premenopausal, perimenopausal, you want to actually do some tracking. If you're really interested in the cyclical recommendations for fasting, you want to read Mendy Pelz, P-E-L-Z. You can look her up. She's got an awesome book called Fast Like a Girl, and it's all about fasting for your cycle. So just to do a few little myth busting here to make sure we're all on the same page. IF is intermittent fasting. So myth, intermittent fasting is caloric deprivation. No, it's not. Only if you calorically deprive yourself. You're supposed to eat your caloric needs in your eating window. So you're still eating. Let's say you need 2,000 calories a day. I still want you eating that. You're just eating it in a shorter amount of time, over 8 hours, over 10 hours, over 12 hours. Intermittent fasting does not stimulate starvation mode. We're not starving by going 12 hours overnight. In fact, what we're doing is forcing our body to start adapting to using fat instead of glucose for fuel. So we're becoming more metabolically flexible. We're only going to be starving and in starvation mode if we're not eating appropriately during the eating window. Intermittent fasting results in low or no energy. The one caveat to this is you might feel a little bit low energy if you've never done it before. If you're only going 6 hours overnight of fasting, you might feel a little low energy the first couple times you go longer. But truly what happens, as we saw on the very first slide, is your metabolic rate actually increases and improves. So we have more energy the more consistent we are with this. And ketones are great for our brain. So the more that we dip into those ketones every once in a while, the better our brain feels. Intermittent fasting creates muscle loss. No, it does not. In fact, it actually improves our growth hormone and improves our muscle stimulus. But again, only for eating appropriately and eating the right amount of protein during your eating window. Intermittent fasting does not cause food cravings. And again, just kind of like the energy thing, it might at first, if you're going a longer time than usual of not eating, you might crave something and feel a little hungry. But with consistency, that goes away really, really quick. And actually, the more consistent we are, the more our hormones can talk to each other with that neuroplasticity, and we're better able to hear and listen to our hunger and fullness cues. Okay, where do we begin? Start with the 12-hour overnight fast. Just do that, and do that for 2 or 3 weeks if you need to. Like, don't worry about this being a long time thing. You have your whole life to figure out fasting for yourself. So don't be hard on yourself by not being able to do it today. So start with 12 hours overnight. See how that feels. The next thing to aim for would be to increase the windows of time in between eating during the day, during your eating window. Are you eating every hour, or can we kind of extend that? Next, you slowly add some time to that overnight fast. Maybe you dabble with 12 and a half hours, maybe 13 hours, and see where you feel in each area. And I would say do the same thing consistently for 3, 4, 5 nights in a row so you can really feel the difference. Allow for flexibility. Okay, so it's okay to break your fast because you were invited to a wedding and you're going to eat and drink and then party. Go for it. Let yourself have flexibility too. That's the whole point. Start playing with your macros. So your protein, your carbs, your fat. Start playing with, wow, do I feel better now that I've been fasting for 12, 14, 16 hours? Do I feel better with more protein during the day? Do I feel better with slightly higher carb, slightly lower carb? Play with that. And then do consider intermittent or fasting mimicking. But if you're going to do this, work with a dietitian. So you can work with me or Lynn here in the Wellness Center. We're very familiar with fasting mimicking. Let's make sure you're appropriate for it. And then you know how to do it well throughout your year to where you're actually getting benefit from it. There's my little comic. Fasting means you stop eating. It doesn't mean you eat your food faster. All right, so that puts us at time. Let me pull up your questions because I saw a bunch of them pop into the chat. Feel free to put more questions in there. I'll just kind of hit these. What if your experience has been low blood sugar? So I think there's two ways to look at this. Is one, are you on blood sugar medication like metformin? If so, once you start fasting, again, your blood sugar is going to improve, which means if you're on medication, it's going to go even lower. So make sure you're talking with your endocrinologist to make sure that your dosage is appropriate for you as your own blood sugar starts to improve. On the flip side of that is some people are just predisposed to lower blood sugar. I happen to be one of those people. I am just kind of predisposed to that. Your body knows how to handle itself really well. And assuming you have fat stores on board, when your blood sugar gets low, your body will tap into its fat stores and use ketones. But you have to make it get there. It doesn't know how to do that if your normal response for the past 15 years has been as soon as your blood sugar goes down a little bit, you give it sugar. So your body hasn't practiced getting into fat storage, which is why I like the overnight fasting, because you don't feel that initial little pang of a low blood sugar and you force your body gets forced to tap into fat cells while you sleep. Now, that being said, if you're someone who's tracking your blood sugar and it's going lower and lower and lower and you're starting to feel woozy, like that, please take care of that also. There's only so much we want to force your body, but maybe don't have quite as high of a sugar bite to change that. Maybe have a piece of fruit with a big piece of protein or fat. So some cheese, a piece of meat, along with the sugar so that you're not just spiking your sugar and we're going all over those dips all over again. What is the latest time we can wait to have breakfast to prolong our fast? So I wouldn't go past 16 hours. So it depends on when your last bite of food was the day before, of when that first bite of food should be the next day. But the research has shown 12-12 up to 16-8 being the magical window for intermittent overnight fasts. And then any recommendations for people who are exercising regularly and getting 300 to 450 minutes per week. So higher intensity exercise. You just want to make sure that you are getting your calories in your eating window. So there's nothing that says just because you're exercising more that you need to eat over longer periods of time. You need to make sure you're getting your calories over a longer or in that shorter window. And this is where it's going to really depend on the person. If you are like a really early morning riser and you go for a run really early in the morning, you may do better with a 12-12 or a 14 rather than the 16-8. Simply because that way you have more fuel on board when you wake up really early in the morning. But if you're more like an afternoon exerciser, you probably don't need to make any change at all because you've been eating throughout the day and you have fuel on board. So make sure you're getting the calories you need for your body's needs and for your exercise in the eating window. And then depending on what time of day you exercise and if you're feeling kind of sluggish or lightheaded, you may need to shorten that window a little bit or have a little bit of fuel right before your exercise. So if you wake up after your fast, you might want to have a banana or a half an apple or something just to kind of fuel that exercise a bit. Make sure you're getting enough protein as well. You're welcome. Is that it? Usually fasting, I have millions of questions. Maybe your brains are all spinning, or maybe you all fasted and so you're thinking very clearly today. All right then. Well, I will get this recording going today and I will have it posted on the website and in the caption of the video, I always post the PDFs of these slides. Feel free to email me if you have other questions. You're welcome. And next month, what is next month's topic? I should have looked that up. Now I can't remember, but we have one in May on the cooking class in May as well. So make sure you check the website for the next topic, and I will see you all then.
Thank you, Megan.
You're welcome. Bye, everyone.
Bye.